Hi, I'm Ashton Mackenzie, granddaughter of the late Captain Alby Pointon and Frida Pointon. They were affectionately known to us as Ma and Pa. They established the Majura paddle steamers, which became one of the most popular tourist attractions in Mildura and known as a local tourism icon. Pa was meticulous in taking photos and slides of his restoration of the paddle boats. He started with the Donald Duck, went on to the paddle boat Mayflower, then the paddle steamer Melbourne, the paddle vessel Rothbury, and then assisted his son Christopher Pointon in 1999 to retrofit the paddle boat Mundu. One of our family's most treasured possessions is a slideshow recording that Pa did in the early 90s, where he reminisced about the restoration of the paddle boats. Introducing the restoration of the paddle steamer Melbourne.
The business grew and grew, and the boat became too small, so we had to find another paddle steamer. And so we searched up and down the river, and we couldn't really see anything that was suitable. In the meantime, our opposition had bought a bigger paddle steamer called the Canberra, which is 75 feet long, and the Mayflower was only 50, and the Canberra was steam driven. So we had to find a bigger boat, steam driven, or get pushed out. And we were very desperate. We couldn't find what we thought would be a suitable paddle steamer. And this lady that we used to use as ballast, she was here one night and we were talking about what we should do. And she said, well, come back to Echuca and we'll have a look at the paddle steamer Melbourne at Echuca. Well, we'd been up and had a look at the Melbourne, and we were told that it was being put back into service on the River Murray there. We had no hope of buying it. However, she talked us into going up there and having a look at it. And on the way up there, and we're looking around, we looked at many paddle steamers. One we took to look at in particular, which would make a good tourist boat, the paddle steamer Clyde. And when we got to the Echuca, we found the Clyde here. Looking around the river, that's a logging barge. That's how they used to tow the logs down the river. They'd tie the logs to the end of those poles, and then behind that was the paddle steamer Edward. Then behind that again was our first view of the paddle steamer Melbourne. Paddle steamer Kookaburra. We heard that was for sale, and we thought that was too far gone. We drove over the bridge and across the river for a side look at the Melbourne, and that's our first view of the Melbourne. In the foreground is Robert and Lynette. And that's all that's left of the Echuca Wharf. That's only 1/5 of the original wharf. 4/5 have been demolished. There's another view of the Melbourne, and alongside it, the Echuca of the Edwards, the Echuca. Then we went up on the wharf and had a look down at it. Well, we were told while we were there on the wharf that it was being rebuilt and it wasn't for sale. So very disappointed, we came home again. We still searched and searched for a paddle boat that we could rebuild, and 12 months later, we didn't realise it was 12 months to the day, that Mrs. Biggs talked us into going back to Echuca and seeing if Mr. Evans would sell it, because we had heard that not much work had been done on it. The work had ceased. So we went back to Echuca again and found that they had replaced the Malfoy on the deck and painted the paddle box. That's all they'd done in 12 months. So we decided we'd go around to Evans's and see if he wanted to sell it. He was a very well-to-do businessman, but he'd had a lot of sickness, and they were straightening out his affairs. They'd sold everything and straightened all his business out, except for the paddle steamer Melbourne, which he wanted to keep, and his racehorses. Anyway, we went around to Evans's, and he'd gone somewhere with his racehorses. His wife told us he wouldn't be back till 7 o'clock, but if we'd like to come back at 7 o'clock, he would talk to us. We didn't tell her what we were seeing before. Anyway, we came back and we went up the street to a cafe, had tea, and I was getting a bit rotten because, I couldn't see him selling it. So I said, oh, bugger it, let's go home. So we got in the car after a lot of arguing with the two women, and we got 4 miles down the track, and they talked me into going back. And we went around, and we knocked on the door, and Mr. Evans came to the door, and the first one he saw, of course, was Mrs. Binks. He said, hello, May. He said, it's nice to see you. He said, what do you want? He said, oh, well, I want you to meet Mr. Pointon. He would like to buy the Melbourne. So he said, well, come in. And we went into the lounge, and I suppose within 20 minutes, we'd paid a deposit, made out an agreement. He gave me 6 weeks to pay the balance. So we were all happy with that, and away we went. I could see myself owning the Melbourne if I could only raise some finance. So we came back to Mildura, went up to home, and we couldn't raise the money until 4 days before the money was due. The commercial bank came up with the money. So we whizzed up to Echuca, knocked on the door, and Mr. Edwards came to the door, and no, he said, not you. And I said, yes. He said, you haven't got the money? I said, I have. And he said, oh, well, come in. I gave him the money, and before he wouldn't take it, he said, look, he said, I've got a proposition for you. He said, I've tried to get out of this. He said, I've been to the best solicitors in Melbourne. But he said, that little agreement you wrote is perfect. He said, we can't falter. So he said, we can't get the boat back, excepting if you'll sell it back to me. He said, I'm prepared to offer you the price you paid for the boat. So he said, now I'll give you the balance, deposit, and I'll pay you what you was going to pay me if you leave the boat there. I said, no, I'm very sorry. I said, I must have the boat. Well, he said, I can't stop you. He said, we've done everything we can. He wished me all the best of luck. Before he sold it to me, he knew I'd rebuilt the Mayflower. He'd been to Mildura in the Mayflower. He said, I hope you make as good a job as the Melbourne as you made of the Mayflower. This is just a photo. We were so close. Now, all that colouring in the top deck, that's just rust, corrosion, and paint peeling off. It looks rather pretty, but that's what it really is in the track. We had to wait for the river to rise before we could bring it down here. So in the meantime, a lot of work had to be done up. The engine hadn't been turned over for 23 years. Well, I had to put it on the slipway, and there it is, pulled up on the slipway at Echuca. In starting work, we had to completely dismantle and work on the boiler, work on the engine, replace parts of the panels, some of the float and some planks, replace the hinges of the rudder. This work would take us about 6 months. Here's a closer view of the boat on the slipway. There's quite a few photos now of the boat on the slipway at Echuca. Some of them are just to show the shape of the boat, and some to show you some of the work that we carried out. Beautiful shaped stern, typical British stern. Beautiful shape from the back, isn't it? Almost finished. Part of the job, of course, is always the paintwork. Back in the river again. During that whole time I was up there, the Echuca on the deck, he was living on it and acting as watchman. During that time, I would leave Mildura, travel up there and work almost every weekend. And Echuca is 200 and what? Just over 200 miles. Now we had to get the engine working. We cleaned it all down and final overhaul, filling it up with water, lubricating it, making sure all the lubricators work, and generally preparing the engine for operation. Then we realised that a lot of the bridges on the way down hadn't been open for 20 odd years, hadn't been raised, so we decided to cut 6 feet of the funnel off so that we could get under the bridges. So one weekend a mate and I was up there from here, and he's cutting off 6 feet of the funnel and I'm pouring water down so all the sparks from his oxy torch wouldn't set alight to the bottom of the boat. On the bottom is Paddy Hogg. He's a chap I bought the Mayflower off. That's him on the right. On the left at the boiler is an old friend called Ted Olsen. Ted and his father owned 3 or 4 paddle steamers in the early trading days on the River Murray. Ted was around 70 years of age, and he wanted a job on the Melbourne as fireman, and he was with us for 5 or 6 years. But there he is, just lighting the fire, the first fire that had been lit in the boiler for 23 years. We slowly got pressure up, and you see the smoke coming out the funnel, first time for 23 years. In the meantime, through the week I was prefabricating the superstructure that was eventually going to go on the boat. Through the week I was running the Mayflower, night times we were building the superstructure. I told them that the boat had to be painted up and be respectable before we got to Swan Hill, because Swan Hill had just started their folk museum, and Swan Hill had agreed to contact the ABC and get TV coverage on the way down the river. So we wanted the boat to look nice for the ABC. Then we heard that 4 inches of rain at Vanilla, which was enough rain to almost bring the river to the top of its bank. The River Murray Commission advised us that there would be a flush in the river 10 days long. For 5 days it would rise, and then for 5 days it would fall, so we would have to be in the middle of that flush. So very urgently, we bought all the wood we could buy, and I had the whole crew then engaged in loading up the boat with wood. It still hadn't had a run up the river yet, but a lot of the paintwork had been started, as you can see. There we are, just about ready to leave. And if you look in the river, you can see the floodwater has arrived. You can see the current. See the difference in the floodwater now? You see the water's moving. We had a few people taking cars back, but there was no one to take Robert's car on back, so we decided to take it on the boat. So we put Robert's car on the deck. And before we could even start running, we had to have a trial run. So this is the first trial run, the first time the boat had moved under its own power for 23 years. And we got to that stage, and the bloody dinghy got caught underneath the paddle. This boat is there, we cleared the dinghy, and that's the first time the whistle had been blown for 23 years. So the paddle wheels there are just beginning to turn. There we are, and coming down the river we had the Melbourne's whistle and the paddle steamer Gem at Swan Hill, and asked us would we use their whistle coming down the river. And so we carried the Melbourne's whistle and we carried the Gem's whistle from Swan Hill. And there we are, we're just blowing alternately each whistle. That photo was taken from the Echuca walk. See all the people there to see it off. And we're just leaving now, heading for Mildura. It's 550 miles. There we are, on our way. On the wheel on the right-hand side is Paddy Hogg and Robert steering on the other side, and me just having a look. Just a little way out of Echuca, the first tributary is the Compaspe River, and you see the lad there, he's looking up. Compaspe comes in on a bend. And as we go past, you'll see them looking back at the Compaspe. We get up early in the morning, before daylight, get the boat all ready to go, and then we go as hard as we can and get as far as we can. We've got to keep in the middle of this flush. So down we come, flat out. And in the meantime, everyone's got to be painting. The boat's got to look nice by the time it gets to Swan Hill. You can see there too, the current is very fast and there's a lot of debris being washed down the river. We pulled into a little place called Turumbury, or just above Turumbury, and that's the first lock and weir there at Turumbury. Because there we are pulled in alongside the bank, and it rained all night. Up next morning early and away we go. Until we get to Turumbury Weir. We just got there, as you can see, just as the sun was going down. We pulled into the lock with the idea of next morning we'd be on our way again. Next morning we took some photos. You can see it's still raining with the water on the side of the lock, just starting to lower the water down. And I think it's the first time for about 20 years a paddle team had been through the lock. That's the manifest. Of course, you're back into a lock and you're back out. Not all lock, but a strange lock like that. So there we are, being lowered down, and now we're ready to leave. The next place we reach is Kudrook. There's a timber mill there, and we buy all their off-cuts for firewood. Kudrook is where the Melbourne was originally built. Then we had to go through a number of bridges, and you'll see a few people gathering on the roadway because it's been on the ABC that we're going down the river, and people are gradually collecting near the river to Watrascope Park. There, once again, you're back through. One of the ideas of backing through is that if things go wrong, you just steam ahead and go, get out of it. So you back through slowly. If you look closely, you'll see a bit of timber poured up on the pylons of the bridge. Now we're getting lined up. As we're coming down the river, you have trees in some places almost right across the river. So you can see a lot of debris on the roof. That's the debris that we'd hit from the trees along the bank. Right, we're back through, and down on the bottom right-hand corner, you'll just see the front of the boat. So you just go backwards and swing around and then carry on down the river. We pulled into the river there, and I had to leave there to go home and run a trip on the Mayflower. So we took the car off. You can see the car's gone now. And you can see since we left Echuca, the cabin has been painted white, and the boat had been painted just about finished. And I left them instructions. The boat had to be finished and cleaned up and perfect by the time they got to Swan Hill. And after they got to Swan Hill, they could please themselves what they did, you know. So as you can see now, the boat's, quite presentable. See, the doors have been painted blue, and it's quite a presentable picture, you know. And we're getting pretty close now to Swan Hill. There we are, pulled up at Swan Hill, and above Swan Hill is the paddle steamer Gem. And that, if you look closely, is the paddle steamer Gem, all white. It's just all painted undercoat white at the moment, and there's the Melbourne there pulled up alongside. We were there for 2 days because we got ahead, too far ahead of the river. The river's starting to get low, so I said wait there for 2 days until the flood picks up a bit. So they stayed there for 2 days, and then they were ready and on their way. They were just ready there, waiting for the bridge to be raised and be on their way again. But they got the bridge halfway up. You can see the bridge is halfway up, and one of the gears broke. So then they had to take that gear off, race downstream, take the gear off the next bridge, bring it up here and put it on this bridge, lift this bridge, let the boat through, then race the gear back to the original bridge again and put it back on again. So we're there, we've just gone through the bridge and about to turn around and continue on downstream. You can see the number of people on the bridges has increased because of the publicity that the boat had got coming down the river. There's our skipper, and there's another bridge. We were still ahead of the flood, so they had to wait another 2 days at Robinvale, or Euston, where the lock is. While they were there, they loaded on more timber from a timber mill for fuel. They loaded on the front deck and also behind the paddle boxes. So we're pulled into the lock. Now we'll be lowered down. They'll open the lock. And there's no pictures from there to home. And that's the boat pulled out at home, exactly within a metre of where it is at the moment. Next day, the crew, before they went home, for those that hadn't gone home, assembled on the deck to have their photo taken. In the meantime, during that 10 months, I was fabricating the boat. And all that vent work was done with a hydraulic press. We had to get all those different shapes. You see the different shapes painted on the sheets of plate? There's red, green, blue, brown, white, and they represent the different sections of the bend. After we made the bends to shape, we had to make the beams, bolt the beams in place, and that was absolutely completed. As it was completed, it would be painted and stacked in a group separately, so we kept each section quite careful. That's a lot of work in bending those anchor lines. That, of course, is the bottom front, and further back you see another section that's completed and put together. Right, now the boat arrived home, and we've nearly got the prefabrication finished, so we've got to take that cabin off and put the prefabricated sections back on it. So we've got to take the winch off. The winch used to be underneath the wheelhouse, so we've pulled the winch out from the wheelhouse further out onto the deck. And this is at 4 o'clock after I'd run my trip on the Mayflower. We had a rendezvous with the Andy's engineer's crane near the bridge, where there's a high bank and the crane could be used to pull the winch off. So we got down to the bridge and we just turned around in front of the bridge and just slowly moving into a high bank. And Andy's crane came along and we found that the winch was far too heavy. We thought they'd just hook onto it and lift it off. So then we had to pull the winch in sections to take it off its section. It's starting to get dark until finally, to get the last section off, was done in almost complete darkness. Then, of course, we'd run out of money again, and rather than get the crane to lift the cabin off, we had to pull the cabin off, and so we decided on a very brave project. We got 2 blocks of handy billies and put them around the house, and used the house as an anchor. Then we put 2 planks over the top of the concrete wall out the front, and put a cable on the boat around the house. And the idea was supposed to pull the cabin off the boat onto the lawn, all right? And then, Cabin went up nice, on its way, until we got to the wall. Then it got jammed on the bloody wall. And then the wall collapsed. But eventually, there it is sitting on the wall before it collapsed. Then eventually, we had to get a crane. The crane was busy, so we decided to get the front cabin ready to pull off. So we got the front cabin ready to pull off. While we wait for the crane, we're starting to put the prefabricated section on. The crane came along and picked up the rear section of the cabin. As we're going back past the house, we had to pass underneath some electric light wire. So he lowered the jib down so that the cabins were just clear of the ground. The cabin got a swing up and come right through the wall into the bloody kitchen.
Oh.
So we had to rebuild the bloody front of the back of the kitchen. And if you look, the crane, that front section, the cabins were so heavy, we had a tank full of water, 44 gallons full of water, and if you look, I just stepped off the front of it and the wheels come off the ground. See the front wheel of the... Right. Right, then we start putting more of the prefabricated sections. In addition to putting on the prefabricated section, we had to have lower guard bricks fitted so that when you pulled into the wall, that would hit before your cabin. We're putting the decking on. Those things across the deck are clamped. Each night we'd put on about 4 planks either side, squeeze them with those clamps and nail the deck down. And all that sawing, see right around the top, no electric saw, no chainsaw, just up and down with a bloody little tenon saw. I had to saw all around the bloody boat. It was nearly 300 feet. Those guard decks, so you see the one on the left-hand side's almost ready for the timber to go on the top. That's a photo from on top of the Mayflower. There, we nearly finished the top deck. Now at the back, if you look, you see the white section of the top deck being put on. The bottom deck is finished. Mouthboard's been put on and the batten around the side's been put on. This is the funny part. We've got to lift that framework up and put them on top of those drums. And then put the vertical members underneath down onto the deck. Then the 3 of us boys had to lift that up, and Mum had to slide the drums under that channel. And Mum, just behind the lad in the middle, you'll see a 4-gallon drum painted white and green. Well, us 3 boys lifted up the channel on arm's length above our head and asked Mum to shift the drums underneath it. Well, she shifted the drums underneath it and we lowered it down onto the thing and it was too low. So we said, we'll lift it up again and put that drum under it. So the 3 of us lifted that angle iron up there. I said, grab the drum. Instead of Mum grabbing it, one of the others let it go and left 2 of us holding it and we couldn't hold it. So that took us to the deck. Then I spent 10 days in St John of God's Hospital with a put back. It was from there to there, a whole film didn't come out. But besides doing the superstructure, we had to make the seat. Now we're racing as quick as we can to get it done by Christmas. We missed the first week of the Christmas holidays, but there it is on its maiden voyage, carrying passengers, a good load, but the surveyors would never let us go like it is now. Look, there's no handrails for passengers. Passengers could walk outside, and there on the back deck is a big heap of life jackets covered with canvas. And there's swimmers on the back deck. You always got them in the bath. Anyway, there it is on its maiden voyage. Well, there it is pulled up on the slipway. the first annual inspection. Quite a nice boat, isn't it? That's the story of the Melbourne.